Competitive states. We did a fantastic job with the Senate. I think we're very proud of what's happened there. We had many more seats to defend. They spent almost $200 million on Senate races in South Carolina and Kentucky alone, 2 races, and hundreds of millions of dollars overall against us. At the national level, our opponents' major donors were Wall Street bankers and special interests. Our major donors were police officers, farmers, everyday citizens. Yet for the first time ever, we lost 0 races in the House. I was talking to Kevin McCarthy today. He said he couldn't believe it. 0 races, very unusual thing, 0. And actually won many new seats with, I think, many more on the way. This was also the year of the Republican woman. More Republican women were elected to Congress than ever before. That's a great achievement. I won the largest share of non-white voters of any Republican in 60 years, including historic numbers of Latino, African American, Asian American, and Native American voters, the largest ever in our history. We grew our party by 4 million voters, the greatest turnout in Republican Party history. Democrats are the party of the big donors, the big media, the big tech, it seems, and Republicans have become the party of the American worker, and that's what's happened. And we're also, I believe, the party of inclusion. As everyone now recognizes, media polling was election interference in the truest sense of that word by powerful special interests. These really phony polls, I have to call them phony polls, fake polls, were designed to keep our voters at home, create the illusion of momentum for Mr. Biden, and diminish Republicans' ability to raise funds. They were what's called suppression polls. Everyone knows that now. And it's never been used to the extent that it's been used on this last election. To highlight just a few examples, the day before election, Quinnipiac, which was wrong on every occasion that I know of, had Joe Biden up by 5 points in Florida, and they were off by 8.4 points, and I won Florida easily. So they had me losing Florida by a lot, and I ended up winning Florida by a lot. Other than that, they were very accurate. They had him up 4 points in Ohio, and they were off by 12.2 points. And I also won Ohio, great state of Ohio, very easily. And the Washington Post had Biden up 17 points in Wisconsin, and it was basically even. They were off by about 17 points. And they knew that. They're not stupid people. They knew that. Suppression. There are now only a few states yet to be decided in the presidential race. The voting apparatus of those states are run in all cases by Democrats. We were winning in all the key locations by a lot, actually. And then our numbers started miraculously getting whittled away in secret. And they wouldn't allow legally permissible observers. We went to court in a couple of instances, and we were able to get the observers put in. And when the observers got there, they wanted them 60, 70 feet away, 80 feet, 100 feet away, or outside the building to observe people inside the building. And we won a case, a big case, and we have others happening. There are lots of litigation, even beyond our litigation. There's tremendous amount of litigation generally because of how unfair this process was. And I predicted that. I've been talking about mail-in voting for a long time. It's really destroyed our system. It's a corrupt system, and it makes people corrupt even if they aren't by nature. But they become corrupt. It's too easy. They want to find out how many the votes they need, and then they seem to be able to find them. They wait, and then they find them. And you see that on election night. We were ahead in vote in North Carolina by a lot, tremendous number of votes. And we're still ahead by a lot, but not as many, because they're finding ballots all of a sudden. Oh, we have some mail-in ballots. It's amazing how those mail-in ballots are so one-sided, too. I know that it's supposed to be to the advantage of the Democrats, but in all cases, they're so one-sided. We were
We're watching President Trump speaking live from the White House, and we have to interrupt here because the president has made a number of false statements, including the notion that there has been fraudulent voting. There has been no evidence of that. Allegations by his campaign, but his campaign spokespeople unable to provide any evidence. He also has suggested that the polls, and many of which were incorrect, were somehow the product of election interference. Chuck Todd, Andrew Mitchell with me here. Hate to cut away from the president.
No, look, he's trying to set a narrative, and he's even admitting that it was a narrative he was beginning to set before the election. Remember, I've been talking about these mail-in votes. This was clearly going to be a strategy, or at least he's sort of presenting it that way on that front. But I also think he's trying to accomplish something else here. He's trying to project a little bit of strength within the Republican Party. He began by trying to talk about all of the successes down the ballot, and I found that to be almost a reminder to the Republican Party, hey, how come you don't have my back? He didn't say it that way, but he's looking for Republican help beyond his loyalists here, and I think that's clearly what he's trying to do. So he's trying to paint this false picture of how the election counts go. This is a fairly, because it's a close election. Close elections, it takes a while because you got to wait to see all the vote to figure out who won or lost. That's the only reason this has taken an extra couple of days. But the counting of the absentee votes or mail-in votes has actually gone, I think, quite smoothly when you consider how many people chose that option. So it's just plain old conjecture. There's nothing there.
Andrew, he says the GOP kept the Senate. That is still not a settled question right now. There's a couple of runoff races in Georgia that could, if Biden wins the presidency, give.
By the way, can I jump? Some people took. We had said David Perdue had fell under 50%, and some people took that as saying we had already said it's going to be a runoff. All this stuff's unofficial. It certainly looks like, and there could be two runoffs, but the point is, there is no indication yet that Republicans have guaranteed the majority.
We don't know the Alaska Senate yet either. The fact is that none of the prominent elected officials, that Republican officials, have come to the defense of the president's assertion that this is fraud and that it's rigged. I mean, not Mitch McConnell, not others. In fact, his sons have been tweeting that these Republicans who have other Republicans, Nikki Haley and others, who might have ambitions for 2024, are not coming to his defense strongly enough. So there's been a lot of anger in social media from the Trump family.
Let me go to Peter Alexander right now. Peter, from what we could hear, the president did not address the elephant in the room, and that is the fact that Pennsylvania is narrowing for him, that his paths to victory are very narrow at this point.
Well, Lester, I think you're right. I mean, I think that's why his messaging has changed over the course of this day. He tweeted early this morning in all caps, "Stop the count," which you recognize, if you stop the count right now, were that possible, the president of the United States would lose, and the next president would be Joe Biden. So it was clear, as we were told, the advisors convinced him to change the messaging to stop the fraud. That was, in effect, the best effort they thought the president had in this argument. But as he assails the fraud, in spite of no evidence, no proof that there has been any right now, a message that's been shared by his own allies, Sean Spicer, the former press secretary, one of the Republican senators from Pennsylvania, or the Republican senator from Pennsylvania, Pat Toomey, today, saying they've seen no evidence of fraud, widespread fraud in the state of Pennsylvania. But I was struck by what the president said when he was touting those victories in the House seats that have turned red, that he did that in the same breath that he was assailing the mail-in ballot and the balloting process, saying it's being stolen from him. You recognize this is a single ballot, so the House victories can't be legitimate,
point, Peter.
But his failure there can't be illegitimate. That was striking to me. And at the end of the day, I think this is a president who's upset about the mail-in voting. Remember, he voted by mail. But beyond that, perhaps more significantly, this was a president who assailed the mail-in balloting process from the beginning over the objections of his own aides and his own allies, because they were afraid that this very thing could happen, that when the votes were all counted, that ultimately it would suppress some of the support for him and would help boost Democratic support.
Peter Alexander, thanks. The president's remarks coming a couple of hours after we saw former Vice President Biden making his call for patience and for all the votes to be counted. Let me go to Kristen Welker right now. Kristen, any early read from the Biden camp on what we just heard from the president?
I just reached out to the Biden campaign, Lester. They say they have no plans to respond at this point in time. They want to let what we heard earlier today from former Vice President stand. And let me just remind you of a little bit of what he had to say. It was a very different message from the one we just heard from the president. He said the process is working, the count is being completed, and we'll know very soon. We have to count the votes. So, again, a starkly different message. Biden also, though, expressing increased confidence that once all the votes are tallied, he and Senator Harris will be the victors in this race. But again, really stressing the need to let this process play out. It is worth noting that the Biden campaign has been defiant in the face of these allegations of fraud. They've called the lawsuits from the Trump campaign meritless and charades. And it's also worth noting that a number of these lawsuits that the Trump campaign has put forward have already failed in several states, Lester.
All right. The counting is going forward. Nothing that either candidate can say right now will change that fact. The votes are being counted. The voices of the American people are being heard. But we wanted to let you hear from the president. He had gone dark, at least in front of the camera, for a couple of days since that very late night statement he made Tuesday into early Wednesday morning. We'll take a break. This has been an NBC News special report. I'm Lester Holt in New York.